Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to my channel. I'm Navya and I'm going to be giving you some tips that I use to help me revise for A-level maths. Now the reason I'm making this video is because I got a couple requests after filming my A-level psychology video asking me to make this video. Hopefully at least one thing I say in this video should help you. Now my first tip is very basic and generic, but only because I want to highlight how important it actually is. It's to practice, of course. You can't just watch someone else solve the problem or read it from the textbook and expect to know it. By practicing, you will understand how to solve the problem, and more importantly, to make sure you don't miss any steps. Now, summarizing all this up, my next tip is to do all the questions from the past papers and use the mark schemes to correct them yourself. Don't get someone else to do them. Answering these past paper questions and correcting them using the mark schemes helps you understand the exact format of how you'll be asked questions in the real exam, and more importantly, to make sure that you're not missing any steps during your working out. Now, a really basic example of this would be like a quadratic equation. If you write it out in its full form and then go straight to writing down the factors without writing it in its factorized form, you might miss a mark depending on your exam board if they decide to award a point only if you write it down in its factorized form. So correcting them yourself will make sure that you write down the steps that you need to get the marks and not waste time writing down steps you don't need to write to get marks. Now, understanding what steps you need to be writing down and what steps you don't need to be writing down will allow you to finish the exam quicker and give you time to go over everything again. My next tip is to use a varied source of resources. Make sure you find out what works for you best and use those constantly. For example, something I used a lot was YouTube. A channel that really saved my grade was TL Maths. I used this for the board OCR B board, if I recall that correctly, but I know he does videos for all boards, especially Edexcel, since that tends to be the most popular board. Otherwise, do some fishing, have some patience, and find out what resources work for you best. Spending more time that help you find these resources will end up saving you time when you're revising. Now, what I found really helpful was making a question document. Now, I made two of these, one for questions that I didn't understand how to solve, and the mark scheme didn't really help me understand how to solve them either, and another one for questions that I got wrong the first time and or struggled to solve them quickly. After you've made your first question document, I'd suggest finding out how to solve these questions. Resources that I used a lot was teachers. Use your teachers, especially if you've got really good ones. Otherwise, something I don't hear people talk about a lot was the student room. I recall the week before the exam when I was revising and then I'd suddenly find an extremely hard question on the internet that I couldn't figure out how to solve. I'd post it immediately on the student room and someone else also going through the same thing would help me out there. When I did my A-levels, ChatGPT hadn't completely taken over the world yet, but I do know that it still is helpful. So using ChatGPT to revise might be effective, just don't use it to cheat. ChatGPT would give you step-by-step solutions to these. Now obviously take these sources with a pinch of salt, you can't really trust them completely, but you can probably most likely trust your teachers. But also it depends from situation to situation. I guess the point of these question banks is to make sure that you don't neglect a question if you don't know how to do it, because if you're aiming for the top grades, it's so helpful to be completely thorough in the spec. My next tip, which probably should have been the first thing I said, is to make a revision timetable. Now obviously it's a bit late to be saying this, so I'm not going to really bother, but if people watching this are not taking the exams in 2025, this might be more helpful. Basically, you don't want to end up cramming. I'm posting this video in March, and what I'm finding that is my A-level psychology video, which I think I posted over 8 months ago, is suddenly gaining a lot of traction now compared to when I posted it before the year started last year. I'm starting to see that a lot of people are just panicking last minute or cramming, and that's probably why my video is suddenly getting a lot of views. So if you're here, you're probably also doing that, but if you're just using this for genuine last minute tips, then you're doing the right thing. It's not super simple to just go from a U to an A immediately. It took me the whole of this summer after year 12 to 13 and consistent working in year 13. If you are genuinely super stressed now and cramming, I suggest you do the harder topics first. For example, calculus questions can go up till 12 marks on the exam, which is worth a lot more than the amount of marks you'll be gaining for the first few topics that you've probably already done in GCSEs. I know it can be so tempting to just do the easy ones first so you can tick off more topics as completed, but trust me, you're so going to regret that, because when the exams get closer, you're going to be so much more stressed and are not going to be able to put in all your attention onto a hard topic last minute. But putting your attention onto an easy topic last minute will be so much easier and less risky. These harder topics are what can make or break your difference between a B and an A, or an A and an A star. My next tip might sound silly, but it is to avoid making silly mistakes. Hot take, but I think it's more important to get whatever you've answered already right, then finish the question pen or paper. When you're stressed, it's so simple to be overconfident and do easy maths really fast, but it's also very simple to get this wrong. Now, I remember I was doing a practice paper 3 exam, and I recall the last question being a 12-mark integration question. I was doing this timed and I was extremely stressed, and I remember doing something really silly and messing up an extremely simple 1-digit division. And although I got the error carried forward mark, I obviously didn't get marks for the right answer, and this made me lose out on a grade. So make sure that everything you're writing down is right, especially when it comes to the maths. And don't be shy to use the calculator if something is taking you way too long to do in your head. My next tip is to understand the formula sheet thoroughly. Make a separate formula sheet for the formulas that are not on the formula sheet but are needed to be remembered. And what I did was I used it when I was practicing. Eventually I'd used it so many times that I just ended up remembering these formulas. However, if you find that memorizing them the first time and then trying to recall them from memory every single time helps you better, then go ahead and do that. I also remember I always had a printed version of the formula sheet, so I didn't end up spending time in the real exams trying to figure out where an equation was in the formula sheet and struggling to remember what variables mean if there was some confusion with them. It might even be helpful to make notes from the formula sheet when you're practicing and then eventually remember everything from memory. My next tip is to use a calculator to its best ability. Calculator hacks are so helpful. You can use YouTube or the student room to find out about these. I will paste a playlist that I found helpful when I was practicing. It helped me solve things quicker by using the calculator for these things. And lastly, since this is a last minute exam video, make sure you know everything in the spec, and if you don't, try and find a YouTube video or use your textbook to understand something that you haven't gone over already. And yeah, those are all my tips for today, and of course I don't know how qualified I am to be giving these tips out. I'm trying to give the subscribers what they wanted. Good luck for your A-level exams, and I'd be so grateful if you subscribed. I try to post videos that aren't A-level content related, but I also do listen to my people. So get a good night's sleep, drink a lot of water, eat well, and smash the exam. Bye!